Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, October 16th, 2023. All right, so since the last episode of this show was published, a lot has happened in Gaza. Pretty much as soon as I posted the last show, the news broke that Israel ordered the evacuation of the northern Gaza Strip, an area that's home to about 1 million people. And things have been horrific since then with bombing, and they're running out of water, and the hospitals are being overwhelmed. So I'm going to get into that in a lot of stories tonight, but the first thing is more related to the rhetoric that we're seeing from the Israeli officials. I thought this was important to highlight. So the top story at the top of antiwar.com today, Israeli president says that there's no innocent civilians in Gaza. So Israeli President Isaac Herzog said Friday that civilians in Gaza bear responsibility for the Hamas attack on southern Israel, as Israeli bombs are killing scores of people in the besieged enclave. So Herzog said, quote, "It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It is not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true," end quote. So notice he calls Gaza a nation, but Gaza is not recognized as any sort of independent country. It's been under this blockade since 2007. Herzog claimed that civilians in Gaza, quote, "could have risen up. They could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat," end quote. So you often hear this line of argument from proponents of, Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza, or just proponents of, the collective punishment of Gaza in general. They always say, oh, they elected Hamas. They got what they asked for. They're always electing Hamas. Like, people act like there's elections going on all the time or something. But the reality is the last election, the only election where Hamas won, was in 2006. And Hamas got about 43% of the seats in the parliament. And the rival party, Fatah, was about 41%. So not too far behind. And again, this was 2006. And a point I'm always making is that half of Gaza's 2.3 million people are children. So 2006, that means they were, half the population was either not of voting age or was not even born yet. So this idea that these children voted in Hamas is just a complete nonsensical talking point that you always hear. And then just for a little background on those elections and what kind of transpired afterwards, so those elections happened, but there was never a government was never formed based on those elections. Fighting broke out between Hamas and Fatah. And I linked to a really interesting story here. This is from The Guardian, but it's based on a Vanity Fair article that was published in 2008 that basically revealed the administration of George W. Bush pushed for Fatah to, basically launch a coup against Hamas. So that fighting that the U.S. encouraged was the justification basically for the blockade. Well, first it led to Hamas kicking the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza, and Hamas took power in the Gaza Strip, and then that's what Israel used as the excuse to impose the blockade. So what's really interesting about this story is that they quote David Wormser, who is a very well-known neocon who was a former Middle East advisor to the vice president at the time, Dick Cheney. And apparently there was a lot of infighting between the neocons in the Bush administration because of this coup, because of this plan. So basically what he said, this is a quote from him again in 2008, what he said went down in Gaza after the election. He said, quote, "It looks to me that what happened wasn't so much a coup by Hamas, but an attempted coup by Fatah that was preempted before it could happen," end quote. So saying that Hamas preempted the coup. So again, it just goes against this whole narrative. And the people that were pushing for this plan to back Fatah, which is described as a plan to undo the results of the elections in the West Bank and Gaza in 2006, This was approved by George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice, and Elliott Abrams, who keeps appearing in U.S. administrations. So it's a very interesting report. And again, that Hamas takeover was used to justify the Israeli blockade on Gaza that started in 2007. And that's what has given Israel the power to impose a complete siege on Gaza in the wake of this October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. And since that attack was launched and Israel started bombing Gaza, the death toll right now of these people that Herzog says are all responsible for the attack stands at 2,450. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, and they said that number includes 724 children and 458 women. And this number is still rising as the airstrikes continue. And again, the hospitals are really overwhelmed. All right, so the next one here. Israeli military says that it's in formation to strike Gaza City. So an Israeli military spokesman said Sunday that Israeli troops are in formation to strike Gaza City in the northern Gaza Strip, as Israel is expected to launch a ground incursion into the besieged enclave. So Israeli military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Concreus, I just totally butchered his name. He said, quote, "Gaza City is where the focus and the hub of Hamas activities are. That is where most of the commanders are, most of their infrastructure, and their ability to continue to operate," end quote. So the New York Times reported on Saturday that Israel's plan is to invade and capture Gaza City and attempt to wipe out Hamas's leadership. The operation is expected to involve tens of thousands of troops and will be Israel's largest ground incursion since at least 2006, when Israel invaded Lebanon. So besides sending in the infantry, the incursion will include tanks, commandos, and mine sappers. The force will receive support from Israeli warplanes, attack helicopters, and artillery fired from land and sea. The U.S. is strongly backing Israel as it's preparing to invade Gaza and is launching relentless airstrikes. So I put in a map here of the Gaza Strip. If you're watching, you see where it says Gaza City, just says Gaza in the north there. So that's where Gaza City is. And apparently that's what Israel wants to try to capture. And this is going to be a bloody, brutal fight. I mean, they're going to face all sorts of resistance from Hamas, other, Islamic Jihad and other groups, and just probably ordinary people living there that are just in a desperate situation. More people are going to pick up arms against Israel than are just in Hamas. And it's expected to lead to months of brutal urban warfare, at least months. Who knows how long this thing could really last? And it's just going to be brutal. And it's not clear what Israel's long-term plans are. Say they do get in and capture Gaza City and they cleanse the area of all the Palestinians, push them to the north. Are they going to hand the city back, or are they just going to occupy it and say, this is Israel now? Ahead of the expected ground invasion of Gaza, Israel called for northern Gaza to be evacuated. Again, that's an area that's home to 1.1 million people. Israel said the residents should move to southern Gaza, and this huge movement of people is said to be impossible by the UN. The EU also said it was impossible. And according to Middle East Eye, at least 70 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes while attempting to flee south. There was a convoy of people that were hit on their way to the south. They're told to go south, and they're killed on their way there. More on that in another story. So Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Sunday that the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza will soon reopen for aid. So at least some aid is going to be going in there. But, how much help is that going to be? A few dozen aid trucks going into Gaza with the situation that's happening. I mean, no matter what, if they launch this ground invasion, which it looks like they will, it's just going to be a huge cost to the civilians that live there. All right, the next one here, water runs out at UN shelters in Gaza. This article is from AP, and it says that these UN schools that are sheltering, UN schools and other facilities that are sheltering people are running out of water. Israel cut off the water going in, and whatever water that they had available is running out. And there was reports that Israel turned on water to South Gaza. Jake Sullivan said that on TV on Sunday, but according to AP and other sources, the UN officials and Palestinian officials are saying that they have not seen any evidence of this, that water was turned on in the south. And even if it was turned on, in most cases, you're going to need electricity to pump the water. So if that's not available, then turning on water doesn't really do much. It says aid workers in Gaza said they had not seen evidence that the water was back, and a Gaza government spokesman said it was not flowing. And they have here a spokesman for Israel's energy and water ministry said that it was only flowing at a single location in southern Gaza, so just one place for people to go get water. If it's even on, who knows, but it's just a really bad situation. And this article also details the people. So they were told to flee the north, and Gaza's biggest hospital is in Gaza City, and a lot of people in the area have gone there for refuge. There's about 40,000 people in this hospital and outside, sleeping outside, just hoping that it doesn't get bombed. And now that it looks like Israel's target is Gaza City, I mean, what's going to happen to these people? And there's also people that have gotten to the south and they have nowhere to go. They're just sleeping on the street. There's pictures of people just in sleeping bags. I mean, this is just a complete disaster, and it's just not going to get any better for anybody. So the next one here, a 95-year-old Israeli veteran rallies troops to erase Palestinian children. So this is really something else here. This article is from Middle East Eye. An Israeli army veteran who was involved in a 1948 massacre of Palestinian civilians has called on Israelis to erase the memory of families, mothers, and children. Ezra Yachin, he's 95, and he's one of more than 300,000 army reservists mobilized by Israel since war broke out with Hamas in Gaza a week ago. So they mobilized the 95-year-old. He's not going to be involved in combat, obviously, but he will serve to motivate soldiers. And the things that he's saying is kill children. He said, quote, "Be triumphant and finish them off, and don't leave anyone behind. Erase the memory of them. Erase them, their families, mothers, and children. These animals can no longer live," end quote. He also said in this video, quote, "Every Jew with a weapon should go out and kill them. If you have an Arab neighbor, don't wait. Go to his home and shoot him," end quote. And you can see the video that Middle East Eye posted on their Twitter account. And he was involved in the Deir Yassin massacre, which was a massacre of Palestinian civilians, including women and children, in 1948 during the Nakba. About 107 people were killed in that slaughter, and he actually admitted to it, being involved in it, and killing women and children. This is his side of the story. He said, quote, "The village was a terrorist hideout. Leftist historians claim that we ruthlessly and with premeditation slaughtered the inhabitants of the village, including women and children. That was not the case at all. It is true that women and youngsters were killed, but that was because they served as fighters," end quote. So he admits that they killed women and children because they served as fighters, and, who knows what the story is there, but just the fact that he's admitting to it. Killing children is really something, and this is a massacre that happened at the founding of Israel and when the 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their homes, and at least 13,000 Palestinians were killed to make way for the state of Israel at that time. And most of the people living in Gaza are either refugees from that time or the descendants of refugees that were kicked out of what is now known as Israel proper. All right, the next one, we just have live updates still from Middle East Eye, just to see the latest that's going on over there. But the next story here, State Department memo says no Gaza de-escalation talk. So this is really, the State Department has warned its diplomats not to call for de-escalation or an end to violence as Israeli airstrikes relentlessly hit Gaza, killing hundreds of children, as I covered. So in a message circulated Friday in emails viewed by Huffington Post, the State Department said that high-level officials do not want these three phrases in press materials. de-escalation / ceasefire, end to violence / bloodshed, and restoring calm. So don't call for de-escalation, don't call for ceasefire, don't even call for an end to violence or bloodshed, or say anything about, this is the State Department, and this is what they're telling their diplomats. This just goes to show how the U.S. is giving Israel its full-throated support, no matter what they're doing, no matter how many children they're killing here. And the White House has also disparaged calls for a ceasefire. Last week, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked, what do you think about there's some progressive Democrats in Congress that have called for a ceasefire? And her response was, quote, "We believe they are wrong, we believe they're repugnant, and we believe they're disgraceful," end quote. So that's what they think of peace, repugnant and disgraceful. And this State Department directive not to talk about de-escalation came after Israel told 1.1 million Palestinians in North Gaza to evacuate to the south. And I mentioned in this about the airstrikes that killed 70 people on their way south. BBC confirmed one incident where Israeli bombs hit a convoy, and they counted at least 12 bodies in a video, said it was mostly women and children. So there's not many words for what the Biden administration is doing here. So the next one here, the U.S. will not draw red lines on Israel's use of white phosphorus. So National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Sunday that the U.S. would not draw any red lines over Israel's alleged use of white phosphorus munitions, which is a chemical weapon that can cause severe burns. So Human Rights Watch has said it verified videos of Israel using white phosphorus on Gaza and Lebanon on October 10th and 11th. According to Human Rights Watch, white phosphorus can be used either for marking, signaling, and obscuring, or as a weapon that sets fires and burns people and objects. So in an interview with NBC News' Meet the Press, Sullivan noted that the Israeli military denied the allegations, but he made clear that the use of the chemical weapon would not impact U.S. support for Israel. He said, quote, "I have seen the reports of that. The IDF has actually come out and said they were not using phosphorus bombs. I'm not going to sit here and draw red lines. I was asked the same question at the White House podium a few days ago, and I said, it's not my job in public to draw red lines," end quote. So no red lines for using this chemical weapon. And whether it's deployed for, marking or to light up areas that are going to be hit with other bombs, no matter what the purpose is, the use of white phosphorus in a place like Gaza, seriously risks hurting civilians, of course. When it comes in contact with the skin, white phosphorus can burn all the way down to the bone. And according to Human Rights Watch, even minor burns are often fatal. So a really brutal weapon here that Israel appears to be using. There seems to be evidence. They're denying it, but there's pictures and videos, and it sure does look like white phosphorus. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. deploys a second aircraft carrier strike group to support Israel. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin announced Saturday that he ordered the deployment of a second aircraft carrier and its strike group to the eastern Mediterranean to show support for Israel amid its bombardment of Gaza. Austin said that the aircraft carrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower will begin moving toward the region. He said the purpose is to deter hostile actions against Israel or any efforts toward widening this war. He said the deployment demonstrates the U.S.'s ironclad commitment to Israel's security. So besides the aircraft carrier, the strike group also includes a guided missile cruiser and guided missile destroyers, several of them. So it's a lot of firepower that the U.S. has sent over to the region. And this strike group will join the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group, which arrived in the region earlier this week. The U.S. has also increased its presence of fighter jets in the Middle East in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack. And this massive show of force demonstrates that the U.S. is ready to directly enter the war if it chooses to do so. U.S. officials have stressed the purpose of the deployments is to deter Hezbollah or Iran from entering the conflict. Besides these deployments, the U.S. is also backing Israel's onslaught on Gaza by shipping military equipment, including munitions and Iron Dome interceptors. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Sunday that the White House plans to push Congress to approve new military aid for Israel and Ukraine this week, and that package could also include money for Taiwan. So they're doing everything they can to support Israel in this, and we know they also offered them support to get hostages from Gaza, intelligence and things like that. Not U.S. troops on the ground, but who knows how far this thing's going to go. All right, so the next one here. Israel again bombs Syria's Aleppo airport. So Israeli airstrikes hit Syria's Aleppo airport for the second time within 3 days, again knocking it out of service as these escalations in Gaza are going on. So a military source told Syria's state news agency that this attack occurred on Saturday, October 14th at 11:35 p.m. Local time. And it led to material damage of the airport, putting it out of service. So this came just a few days after this past Thursday, Israeli airstrikes targeted both the Aleppo airport and the Damascus airport, putting it out of service. Apparently, the Aleppo airport came back into service on Saturday, but just a few hours later, Israel bombed it again. And this airstrike marks at least the 27th time that Israel has bombed Syria this year. So sources told the British-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights that the purpose of targeting Syria's airports amid its Gaza onslaught was a warning to prevent Iranian military flights into Syria. The sources added that these two targeted airports had not witnessed any arrival of the military shipments. So basically saying these airports did not get any sort of Iranian military shipments, and that the purpose of the strikes was just to put the airports out of service. Israel often, bombs Syria. As I mentioned, this is the 27th time of the year. And they frame this as campaigns against Iran and Hezbollah's presence in the country, but the attacks frequently kill Syrians and damage civilian infrastructure. All right. The next one, Iran says that it will not enter war with Israel unless Israel attacks first. So amid concerns about Israel's onslaught in Gaza escalating into a regional war, the Iranian mission to the UN said Sunday that it would only enter the fighting if Israel attacked Iran. So Iran's UN mission in New York told Reuters, quote, Iran's armed forces will not engage provided that the Israeli apartheid does not dare to attack Iran, its interests, and nationals. The resistance front can defend itself, end quote. So the resistance front, that refers to Hezbollah and the Shia militias that operate in Iraq and Syria. So also on Sunday, Iran's foreign minister warned Israel that a ground invasion of Gaza could spark a regional war with resistance factions, again referring to Hezbollah and those Shia militant militias. So that's kind of the warning from Iran. If you go into Gaza, Hezbollah is probably going to get involved in this thing. And right now, there's still been exchanges of fire over the Israel-Lebanon border. It's been pretty volatile over there, but there's no sign yet that there's a big Hezbollah attack that they're planning, any kind of incursion into Israeli territory or anything like that. But things are definitely very tense up there, and it could escalate. And the big question is, if Israel goes into Gaza, will Hezbollah really enter this thing? Because that could really change everything. I mean, does that mean the U.S. is basically threatening to bomb anybody that enters this war? And that's the purpose of the aircraft carriers. So if Hezbollah enters the war, is the U.S. going to bomb Lebanon? I mean, that's a big question. And it's a question we really have to ask when you look at what the U.S. officials are saying about sending all those aircraft carriers and fighter jets into the region. All right, so getting out of the Gaza situation, the next story here, a former Ukrainian official says that the counteroffensive is a disaster. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a former advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the summer counteroffensive has failed. He went on to say Kiev will never achieve its war aims of recapturing the Crimean Peninsula and restoring Ukraine's 1991 borders. So this is Oleksiy Arestovich, and he's a former advisor to the office of the president of Ukraine, and he was fired or stepped down. I'm not sure exactly what happened with him. Last year, during the war, he was saying things, from the position of being an advisor to Zelensky, during the war. It's not like he was an official before the war or years ago. He was an official pretty recently. He said that Ukraine made a number of mistakes during the counteroffensive, basically saying that they've gained no territory and that it's just a disaster and many lives and resources were wasted. He argued that Ukraine suffered a major defeat in Bakhmut, causing Kiev to lack the troops and equipment needed for the offensive. He went on to write that this mistake created a second mistake. So what's interesting now is, I haven't been paying too much attention to the battlefield in Ukraine, but it also looks like Russia is starting to make some gains. Russia is kind of on the offensive now. It's not clear if it's a major offensive or they're just launching kind of small attacks along the front. But Putin actually said on Sunday that Moscow's forces are gaining territory. And I was looking at the maps, and it looks, again, the fighting's been going on. It's not like there's been a lull in fighting, but it looks like Russia is starting to make some little advances, and we'll see what this turns into. All right, so the last one here, NATO vows response if Finland pipeline was sabotaged. So one thing that I missed toward the end of last week, a pipeline that connects Finland to Estonia had a leak, and Finnish and other officials said it was likely sabotaged. They're not saying directly what the cause was. They're not blaming anybody, but this took place on October 8th. And this article from Kyle says that NATO has said it will have a united and determined response if another state intentionally damaged this pipeline known as the Baltic Connector. So officials said that an external force caused significant damage to the pipeline that will leave it out of service for several months. So that's what that was the wording that they used, an external force. So that kind of hints that it was some sort of sabotage, and you have NATO saying, we're going to respond. They said something similar when the Nord Stream pipelines were first hit, and then everybody got real quiet about that when they realized it was likely either the U.S. that did it or possibly Ukraine. So we have, you never really hear much about that from NATO now, but so this could develop into something if they start blaming Russia, but they haven't done that yet. Or if they, see if they formally blame somebody, if they do discover that it was sabotage. That is it for the news for today. That was a lot of stuff. Again, mostly Gaza. I hope I've been trying to really stay on top of the situation there, but it's developing pretty quickly. But go check out our Viewpoints. We have one from Gideon Levy, the Israeli journalist that writes for Haaretz. He says a ground invasion of Gaza is a disaster foretold. One from Eric Margulies, how much longer will Palestinians be a martyr people? One from William J. Astore, war destroys history. The god of war consumes all. One from Ted Snyder, does Putin want to rebuild the Russian Empire? And our spotlight is from Trita Parsi over at Quincy. Biden refuses to talk ceasefire, though it could prevent a regional war. So that is everything for me. You could always support the show just by liking, subscribing on YouTube, sharing it around with your friends. All that stuff helps. Follow me on Twitter at TheCampDave. Follow the antiwar.com account. But that's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.